Quite often when we talk about concepts, it's nice to come up with ways of visualizing them and to think about the way in which we organize our world in terms of spaces. We live in spaces and we talk about spaces and we have mental representations of spaces. And vernacular geography is concerned to a large extent with what's the common sense representation and usage of language and meaning about those spaces. So this particular blurb here is taken from a project that Ordnance Survey in the UK ran. I'm going to talk a little bit about a questionnaire and ways of looking at that data that was gathered here in Edinburgh. And there were two questions. One was, what is the postcode of where you live? And that can be given geographical coordinates. And what do you think is the neighborhood in which you live? So the examples which I'll come up with won't make a lot of sense to people who don't know Edinburgh, but you all probably live in cities where you know that there are small communities that have names and where there's a sense of identity. So that's the way to think about this. So there were about 3,500 responses to this questionnaire. It gives us quite a lot of interesting data, and essentially it's just a big table. How do the planners of Edinburgh think about the neighbourhoods? Well, they have these very sharp ward boundaries. This is Hollywood Park here. Up at the top is the Firth of Forth and the Port area. The natural neighbourhoods in which people live don't typically have sharp boundaries. They don't have well-defined boundaries. This is the data. Look at the data after I massaged it a bit and geocoded it. But you can see that there are lat longs here, postcodes, and then the names of the places where people think they live. So Leith, for example, comes up quite often. That's an area in the north of the city by the ports, which used to be relatively independent from Edinburgh City and still has a fairly strong sense of identity. This is one attempt at trying to plot those answers onto a map. And obviously it's not fantastically good, but you can sort of get an impression there of there being different regions. So the turquoisey area at the top is all the people who said Leith. I can actually show you this works. Let's see if this is going to work. So this just allows us to kind of drill down a bit more into points. Again, so these are all areas that compare themselves to Leith. It shows the colours automatically. There happen to be 76 different neighbourhoods which have at least 10 responses, which is many more than I would expect. And there's some changes here into a slightly different blue-green. But you can see that there's broadly a kind of area of agreement in the middle and then fuzziness and disagreement around the boundaries. And here's a slightly different representation just of Leith, which uses something like a heat map. So it represents the density of particular responses in the area. So the lighter colour here is relatively more dense. And again, this is like the dots, but it gives you a certain smoothing by blurring the marks. So if you had more data, you would hope that this kind of smoothing would be supported to some extent that you're interpolating in a relatively appropriate manner. So some of the answers are not particularly helpful. This was one response to someone who said, I live in Gorgie, Stockton, Murray, I don't know what this is. I don't know whether this person meant they live in, this is and, or this is or. Similar Portobello, Piers Hill, Craigton. Presumably these are people who live at the edges of these neighbourhoods. There are also people who are just come up with answers which are just too vague or generic, like Southwest Edinburgh or just Edinburgh. And there are other people who who go the other direction. Oh, okay, sorry, this is what I should have meant to have done. Other direction, Polworth Terrace, very specific. Southwest Edinburgh, too generic. And then these ones which seem to be conjunctive or disjunctive. So you can come up with various ways of dealing with those, and they're not too many to make it worrisome. So this questionnaire was somewhat similar to a survey that was carried out by Michael Warboys on Keele University campus. And he asked people slightly different questions, which was, if you take a particular salient reference point, such as the university library, which places would you say are nearby, or which places would you say are definitely not nearby? So he divides his population into two groups. I think 11, he said, given the library, which of all these places is near? And to another group, he said, which of all these places is definitely not near? And so you can see here that, well, the library is near itself. I think actually they just put it in my hand. Barnes Hall here, everybody agrees, is not near. And there are some cases like 24-hour reception, where some people say it's near, but of the group, we've only got 4 positive responses, and a number of people said it's definitely not near. And this is somewhat analogous to the case where you get these natural neighbourhoods, where you get two boundaries kind of intersecting and overlapping, where you get one person saying it is Socht and another person saying this is Craig and Tinney or something, or not Socht, Craig and Tinney, Crossdorfin. And this plays a bit into the issue that Raquel was raising, that we get very often, even on relatively commonplace notions, disagreement about people's conceptualizations. And we tend to get them in those areas which you might regard as edge cases, at the boundaries of these concepts. And there's a slight chicken and egg situation here. Do you want to think about these as being boundaries because there's disagreement, or is it disagreement because there's boundaries? So going back to this kind of picture, it seems that people here say, yes, I definitely am in Leith. They're clear about it. It's like, this is prototypically Leith. People around here are less sure. And there's going to be a kind of transitional area here where some people say leaf and some people say something else, which is similar to other kinds of phenomena in categorization. So I mentioned in the title conceptual spaces, which is something that Robert also talked about. So this is a Voronoi tessellation where these black marks are meant to be the protein generator points. And this is a model which Pieter Erdenforsters proposes possibly a model for particularly nominal concepts. So, for example, you might say, okay, this is a prototypical dog, this is a prototypical cat, and we've got all these things which here are more like dogs than they are the cats, and things which are more like cats than they are dogs. Yeah? And the weird thing about this is that actually, well, there might be some points here which are exactly the dividing line, but there is a sharp line there between, supposedly between dogs and cats. So you're on this side of the line if you're a tiny bit more like a dog than a cat. And you're on this side of the line if you're a tiny bit more like a cat than a dog. Now, another point which I think is interesting, though I don't know what to make of it, is Pieter Erdenforst claims that we don't compute these spaces, we store them, and they give us some efficiency because it's easier to retrieve the notion of a concept by saying, all right, we have this stored notion of all things which are more or less dogs and all things which are more or less cats, and we can just quickly categorize. We don't have to say each time, am I going to kind of compute closeness to the prototype? And I don't know if there's any actual evidence to show that storage is cheaper than computation for this kind of task, or that we do in fact do one or the other. There's this issue about the sharp boundaries was recently raised by a paper by Igor Dovin and Duvin, and Paul Egre and various other people. And as far as I understand what they were claiming, they were saying, well, actually there may be more than one generator point. We might have a number of exemplars of dogs, not just one prototypical dog. Maybe we think a beagle and a Alsatian, both prototypical dogs. And these would each generate slightly different Voronoi spaces. And it's because of that slightly misaligned boundaries that we get a kind of area of vagueness, so to speak, around those Voronoi spaces at the boundaries. And I think that's an interesting idea, and in a way it fits a little bit with this notion that we might have that vagueness or indeterminacy arises because we have different characterizations of what the boundary is. But there still seems to be an issue which, let's see if I can go back to, come on. Let me go back to this. I'll try and blow this up slightly more, actually. Okay, I can't. Maybe this will work. Bingo. If I'm walking along this road here, I don't know what particular neighborhood this is, but I'm going towards towards Leith. This is a little bit like Sorites Paradox. Here I'm definitely in whatever this area is, and I walk, a meter, and I'm still in it, and I walk another meter, and I'm still in it. At some point I think, no, I'm not. I'm sort of in between. And my confidence in giving a clear answer has decreased. And what I find difficult about the Voronoi tessellation idea is it doesn't actually seem to capture this notion that we really have low confidence in our response in these boundary regions. And just saying there's a kind of a chunk of sort of no man's land doesn't seem to adequately capture that. So that's just to end on a question. I'll finish there.
Okay, I have two questions about this. So one thing, so I showed you the Voronoi tessellation again, also, right? So with the game theory stuff, and we also looked at vagueness. And so what we tried to do, so we had fixed categories, dividing lines, right? So when do we get vagueness in the Voronoi tessellations? And what we did, we say, okay, we assume that the people are not completely rational, right? And there is one factor that you can play with, and one of the interpretations of that is that people are not completely rational. And then you also get a vague area, and you don't get a set of, so different from the Douven, Aigret stuff, they have a set of precise ones, right? We just got vague areas, both in terms of prototypes and in terms of areas. So it's a different, so there are actually two different interpretations of this one parameter that we play with. One is not completely rational, and the other is you don't observe completely what you see. So you don't observe exactly. But okay, so there are different ways of interpreting that. So, okay, another question.
I think I have to talk to you offline about that. Okay, thanks.
Okay, another question is, so you said some of the people, they gave the answers like and line and line how would you actually interpret that, as and or? You said you don't know, but do you think it matters? Because no, I'm asking you this question because you might know that there are theories of vagueness, let's say fuzzy logic, right? That say, well, actually, it doesn't mind so much. It doesn't matter so much in these cases. While some logical systems say, oh, A and not A, that's not possible, and A or not A, that's a lot. If you use fuzzy logic or something like that, then actually there's not much difference between the two.
I mean, from a computational, a naive data processing point of view, the way I actually treated those was I said, all right, if you have, say, 5 alternates, I said you had 5 points in the same location, each with a different label. But I think intuitively my sense is that probably if someone says A stroke B in this situation, they mean A or B, and they're not sure which. But I don't know how I'd be interested in if someone came up with an ingenious way of testing those intuitions.
I mean, these things have been tested for at least for people of different height, right? So
I know that, but
yeah. And then you ask people, is this guy big? You say no. Is this guy not big? No. Is he big and not big? Yes.
Yes, I know. And I suppose the question, one question might be, to what extent is these natural neighborhood situation analogous to those kinds of, I mean, there are clearly disanalogies.
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested to know if we could probe a little bit more what people are thinking, what they say in these regions.
Why don't you test that?
I've been tempted. I thought I might pose as a lost tourist, peering over a map and say, am I in Leith yet?
One group of people who thought about this problem a lot are the geographical information people. I don't know whether you're in contact with them, but I went to a talk by a GIS person who was interested in oceans, and they have this problem in spades. So the two examples that stuck in my mind was, one was the Gulf Stream, which not only doesn't have clear boundaries, but it wiggles around all the place, so it keeps changing where it is. And the other was the North Sea, and I hadn't appreciated before that in fact there is no agreed international boundary between the North Sea and the Atlantic. It's purely colloquial use. And so if you were interested in modelling that, it would be very difficult to know, and you could only do it with this kind of heat map approach, I suspect.
There is a very large literature on vague regions in the GIS literature, which, as far as I can tell, is not completely, but a lot of it is quite distinct from other literature you might think was related. There have been some people who've tried to use techniques from one or the other. In fact, the Warboys paper, so Warboys is a geographer, but he looks at using fuzzy logic, three-valued logic and four-valued logic as ways of modelling his
What's the fourth
survey
value?
data. Sorry?
What's the fourth value?
Both and neither.
Oh, right, okay.
What's best?
He said they all have good features. Though yeah, and there's a lot of people have used fuzzy sets or rough sets.
Yes.
And there's also another whole distinct area of theory of people who looked at vague temporal regions, who don't really seem to talk to GIS people, and so it's quite interesting trying to bring those areas together.
Yeah, the Renaissance.
Maybe.
No, I was thinking that in fact, in fuzzy sets, rough sets, or that kind of approach, also if you look at this in the form of typicality or prototypicality, there's always the issue of granularity. So it depends on how you pose the question to the people. The people would respond, and depending on where they live, they may have a problem about how they interpret the granularity to which they should respond. So what I was thinking is basically the idea that borders are areas. So this is an area that borders with another area, but the border in itself, it's an area. I mean, I can think of someone answering, where you live? I live in the border of this town, this neighborhood, and the other neighborhood. It would be a very normal, natural kind of answer.
You're saying that we ought to treat the borders as being areas like first-class citizens in their own right?
Yeah, not as lines, as areas in a finer granularity level, let's say.
I mean, I was thinking about this. So I live in. Well, one thing is perhaps just mention in passing is that one disanalogy between geographical areas or natural neighbourhoods and conceptual spaces is there just are geographical features which have an effect. I don't know if I've got, so come back to this slide. Just the fact we've got this park here means that the boundaries around here are going to be different, right? And they might otherwise be. So they're natural geographical features. There's also the fact that Leith Walk runs along here. And so a lot of people who live at the top of Leith Walk, perhaps because it's called Leith Walk, so they live in Leith because they live on Leith Walk. Morningside is an area to the south of the city which has a big street through it, and I think a lot of people, if you look at the cluster of points around there, it's denser along that street. I live on an extension of that street, and there's a point where I would say I'm definitely in Brunsfield, and a bit further along, if I walk 5-10 minutes, I'd say I'm definitely in Toll Cross. And I've asked myself about there's this point around Berkeley Church, if those of you know that. Where the hell am I? Am I in Brunsfield or am I in Toll Cross? I don't think I'm in either, actually. I think I'm in this vague sort of area between that's just not one or the other. And my own intuitions are that, you know, there isn't a place. It isn't Brunsfield or isn't Toll Cross.
So I agree with that, and actually my vagueness starts at the King's Theatre, a little further north than yours does, and that brings me to the question I had, which is that when you get these sort of answers that are sort of conveying weird uncertainty, like those stroke ones that Robert asked about. They could be born, the reason they're using that as a strategy could be partly because they're unsure, partly because they're unsure what your conception of the neighborhoods are. So you can imagine them being unsure if they live, say, in Kent Place. Is the colonies a valid answer? Or is the colonies even a neighborhood for the purposes of this? Or do I have to call myself Stockbridge or Inverleith?
We did get some, there are some answers in the questionnaire of the form Stockbridge colonies.
I bet you did.
Yeah. It would be really nice to get more data. I mean, in those cases,
about what those,
I just subsumed Stockbridge. I made a sort of ad hoc decision to subsume Stockbridge colonies into Stockbridge.
Yeah, that wouldn't make people in Inverleith very happy. But anyway, So I guess I mean, I just wanted to make a plea here that when modelling this, you explore how they anticipate in their signals the ontologies they assume their recipients have and where the contentious things might be there.
Yeah, I felt the question, I mean, obviously you might want to...
I noticed it was very much, what do you think your area is, but even so. It's like a DJ saying, where are you from? And I go, Stockbridge? Or, what's the right answer here, right? What's the level of granularity? Do I say Stockbridge, Edinburgh, Britain? Or do I say Greece? Because I look like I'm Mediterranean.
There is an interesting issue there about, if you're interested in where people feel they live. No, I take your point exactly. So if I was a teenager, I might have a different way of conceptualizing my shared space with my peer group than if I was talking to a teacher or some anonymous person from the council who phoned me up. So there's a lot of further empirical analysis you could do in there.